police. A month after this, California lawmakers assembled to make carrying loaded weapons illegal. At the state capitol building where the meeting was being held, Black Panthers showed up and interrupted the thing with guns. It was a peaceful protest, but legislators were definitely terrified. A few even darted under their desks. So the Panthers went outside, Bobby Seale delivered a speech on the front steps, and they were promptly arrested. Keep in mind that it was not illegal for them to carry loaded weapons at this time. In response to this peaceful yet intimidating event, lifetime National Rifle Association member and then California Governor Ronald Reagan said there was no reason why on the streets today a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons. Does the NRA even promote to its conservative members that they back this legislation? The media reported the protest as a violent invasion, and the Panthers' stark differences from non-violent civil rights groups
damaged their reputation in white America forever.
This is Lexual. She is a black leftist YouTuber. She had a conversation with the white leftist YouTuber Vaush, and it put everything into perspective as far as the problems that I've been having with Vaush's commentary on black culture, and also a problem I've been having with black leftists. I've been wondering where exactly a lot of these misconceptions about black people have been coming from as far as the things that I've been seeing on the left. We have seen this over and over again throughout our history. White people are separated from us, and they create a buffer class to kind of give them insight on what's happening within the black community. And it's the buffer class that comes into our communities to manipulate the conversations. But they also go outside of the communities to manipulate people's perceptions of what's happening inside the community. The black people who tokenize themselves and the white people who use these tokens find mutual benefit in playing this game of obscuring what the fuck black people are actually saying. And yet we only acknowledge these black sellouts and useful idiots when they're being used by the right wing, when in actuality they're being used by every corner of the political spectrum. And through oversimplification, omission, and intellectual dishonesty, you can create any narrative you want. Take this clip about the Panthers, for example. This is a very mainstream political story that is used to make conservatives look like hypocrites, which is all fine and dandy. But honestly, this message about conservatives being hypocrites over the gun thing should take a backseat to the conversation about black liberation. This is no different than when conservatives use those few little sentences in the I have the dream speech to derail any conversation about race and racism. There is a huge difference between the way leftists talk about the Panthers and the actual Panthers.
You said if you were stopped.
You know what? We're not.
Of course, we weren't talking about white people are never arrested, white people are never stopped going down. See, that's an absolute statement. You have white people in jail. We mean as the statistical average that blacks are more often stopped according to our number that we represent in society, which is only about 11%.
Right. You know what? I don't think anybody's going to disagree with it. I agree with you completely. How do we change that?
Let me give you an example.
All we're giving statistics is the same old talk.
The way you change it is changing the entire institutionalized racism.
Okay, we're not going to change the whole system this morning. Give us some ideas what we can do to help.
We're not going to do anything but procrastinate. But what I'm trying to say is we have to start movements like the civil rights movement, continue it like the Black Panther Party, continue it like the Republic of New Africa, continue movements like the Nation of Islam, because it needs all of those groups, all of those movements just to start to make a dent in the kind of twisted mentality white people have in this country.
Why aren't they being started
from the upper class to the middle class? Because they all
Rita has a comment here
by the situation of black oppression, one way or another, even when they don't want to.
Yes, that was Huey P. Newton in 1988, after the heyday of the Panthers, making the same type of arguments about disproportionate police stops that current white leftist YouTubers think they've discovered in the past couple of years. But also notice what Huey did. He did something that would seem completely at odds with the way leftists view him. He promoted groups like the Nation of Islam. He denounced this idea of class solidarity. And he also made it clear that race is a priority. Now, you're probably looking at the title of this video and wondering, what the fuck does any of this have to do with Hoteps? My problem with this conversation that Vaush has been having and what Lexual has added is that there is a great oversimplification of what the fuck is happening in the black community. Any pro-black group or religious sect that has not been approved by mainstream white America or these weird leftists is now labeled as Hotep. And it's funny because they never truly explain what the fuck a Hotep is. It just becomes this vague catch-all phrase that is used to undermine and dismiss black people. So the first thing I think we need to do is clearly define what a Hotep is. Now, from my perspective, I go back to the original archetype from back in the day, and this is usually like the things that we've seen in black comedies, whether it be movies or sketch shows or whatever. The idea being the phony pro-black person that really isn't for the cause. What I'm going to do is give you an example of this from this movie, I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker.
Look, I'm here because I can't stand what's happening in this community.
Yes!
Yeah, and somebody has to make a change.
Yes!
Now, brother, will you help me?
Yes! Well, I wish I could.
Damn it, man, I heard the People's Revolutionary Army was once 1,000 strong. Now, what happened?
They got government jobs.
What?
You know that government office building on 25th Street?
Yeah?
We went down to take it over. But they were hiring that day. The brothers walked in with guns. We came out with jobs. The brothers weren't mad anymore. Yes. Whitey is something else.
Damn.
My great Nubian warrior. Dinner's ready.
We have a guest. Meet my old Fay wench.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Would you like to stay for dinner?
She makes the best bean dishes in all the world.
Daddy? Oh, great black king, I finished my homework. Can you watch TV?
Let me hear your report.
Okay. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin in Illinois. This poor white trash went on to become the President of the United States.
Yes?
Once in office, this white capitalist swine manipulated the freedom of the black man for his own political career. Free brother! So another piece of poor white trash shot him in the head. The end. Woo!
Thank you, Jesus. Whitey, I am very pleased. Yes, you and your lovely sister, you may go and watch TV. Go and enjoy. Are you sure, my brother? You will not join us?
No.
Oh, bean ice cream?
Thanks, I'm regular. Look, I gotta be going, man. Thanks.
Struggle!
Power to the people!
All right, you see how I described this archetype and then showed you something that fits exactly what that was? Well, here's a black leftist from Very Smart Brother. He is going to define Hotep, and I just want to go through this and see how our definitions match up.
Hotep is an Egyptian word that means peace. It's basically like the Egyptian version of what's good. It's become a way to describe a certain level of like performative pro-blackness. These Hoteps aren't just super pro-black, they're also anti-women, anti-gay, anti-trans people, basically anti-everything that isn't a straight black man.
The way I define a Hotep is someone who is insincere about their pro-blackness. And usually they go over the top with it as a cover for their hypocrisy or their shiesty ways. Our definitions are a little bit different. But the brother has an example, so let's look at that.
Remember that scene in Don't Be a Menace? It was right in the beginning during the cookout.
Can you do me a favor, my brown skin angel? Can you tap that white girl for me?
He is like the embodiment of Hotep.
My milk of magnesia.
It's not a bad thing to be pro-black.
All right, so that was all the pertinent parts of this video. Did you learn anything? Anyways, let's look at this example that he gave us and let's see if we see a Hotep be anti-woman, homophobic, and transphobic in this scene.
There's all kinds of bitches up in here. Hey, what did I tell you about disrespecting my Nubian princesses? Peace out. With disrespect, you need... Oh my God. The mother of Mecca is right here before me. Do my eyes not deceive me, or am I looking at the goddess Isis herself? Can you do me a favor, my brown skin angel? Can you tap that white girl for me? My milk of magnesia. Oh, after the devil made you, he broke the mold. Well, maybe you and I could make a little jungle fever.
So this was his example now. I don't see what he described. Maybe I'm missing something. I really don't know. But I feel like there's a disconnect that's happening. And I think it's this thing where you're mixing like everything together. The lines are being blurred with definitions. It just becomes a great oversimplification where almost anyone can fit under this label because you can make it mean whatever the fuck you want it to mean. And I'm not doing this in defense of actual Hoteps, actual sexists, actual homophobes, actual transphobes. All that shit is silly to me. What's happening is that you're labeling people indiscriminately. And I've seen this used on the left in such a broad way to dismiss black people's participation in grander political conversations.
You know you're dealing with the Hotep when they regurgitate more than one of these white supremacist beliefs under the guise of black progression. Key similarities between Hebrew Israelite flavored Hoteps and Christian identity white supremacists are that they both believe they are the true descendants of the lost tribes of Israel and that the Jews are evil and control the world.
There's so much to deconstruct. First, I think it's debatable whether we even put the Hebrew Israelites in the realm of pro-blackness. Their whole thing is the religion of Judaism and strict adherence to the Bible, not fighting for the cause of pro-blackness per se. Now, if you actually understand their ideology, what their belief is that all the slaves that were taken from Africa and brought to the Americas come from Jewish settlements that were in Africa. Now, this idea that they believe the Jews are evil and control the world, I don't know where exactly that comes from. I think that's some shit people are adding to the equation because they don't quite understand what the fuck the Hebrew Israelites are even talking about. But the idea that black people are actually the Jews or the chosen people of God predates any of the Hebrew Israelite shit. This goes back to slavery.
Hebrew Israelite history started a very long time ago. Most people would begin Hebrew Israelite history in the late 19th century, but I'm taking a different approach. The truth is, the religious foundation for the Hebrew Israelite ideology began with slavery in the U.S. When African American slaves began to hear biblical stories, they immediately identified spiritually with the plight of the Israelites. For African Americans, identifying spiritually with the Israelites gave them a sustained hope that the God who delivered Israel would surely deliver them. In their slave songs, they made statements such as, "My Lord delivered Daniel, oh why not deliver me too?" They also sung, "Come along, Moses, don't get lost, we are the people of God." So we can see very early on that enslaved African Americans in the United States were laying down the psychological framework needed to identify with the Israelites. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, certain African Americans began not only to identify spiritually with the ancient Israelites, but also claim that they were their direct physical descendants. In 1886 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a man named Frank Cherry claimed to receive a vision through which God told him to present the message that African Americans are the true descendants of the biblical Hebrews. Then William S. Crowdy founded the Church of God and Saints of Christ in 1896 in Kansas with the claim that the 10 lost tribes of Israel were the ancestors of black people. From the beginning of the 15th century up to the second half of the 20th century, the lost tribes idea has been an essential part of the European colonial narrative and discourse. In other words, the lost tribes obsession from the start originated amongst European religious imagination. This was adopted by black people in America who had every reason to find parallels between the suffering of the Israelites and their own traumatic experiences of slavery and Jim Crow. Fortunately, this new idea for many black Hebrews relieved the pressures of being descendants of Africans and having to deal with the Western world's view of that. Identifying with the romanticized plight of the Hebrew Israelites granted African Americans access to sympathy and a respect for their humanity. For a particular sect within the black Hebrew Israelite camp, like Rudolph Windsor, this new identity afforded them the opportunity to separate themselves from the African and join in the denigration of African society and civilization in order to insist that their presence, the presence of the black Hebrews in Africa, brought some sort of cultural or moral superiority. An idea that Rudolph clearly states himself. The argument from Rudolph Windsor has strong undercurrents of black Hebrew Israelite superiority over Africans. The Jews had settled among the most civilized people throughout the ages. The Jews imported into the western part of Africa a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD.
But if I say, hey, don't let nobody debo you for your chain, what that mean? Don't let nobody snatch it. Don't let nobody snatch it. So if I talk to you in that type of tone, you can pick up what I'm talking about. In the scriptures, when it speaks about Egypt, it's just simply talking about bondage. So read it again.
Come on, bro. This up from the top. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again.
So when he talking about Egypt, he's talking about bondage. The Lord said, I'm going to take you into bondage, but this time it's going to be with ships. This time it's going to be with ships. Who can tell me of people that done went into slavery on ships outside of the so-called Negroes? Trivia. Right? I'm going to give y'all some knowledge. The so-called Hispanics and Native Indians went into slavery on ships as well.
Right.
They wasn't taken from Africa and brought over here. They were taken from here and taken back over to Africa. And taken back over to Europe. And taken to the Caribbean.
What are you talking about?
Man, you don't know nothing, man.
Man, what are you talking about, bro? Man, what are you talking about, bro?
Get out of here, bro.
Man, I don't want to hear you, bro.
You don't know nothing. You don't even know your own history.
Right.
You don't even know your own history. You don't even know the Sudanese. Go back to the ancient Egyptians, man.
Bro, come on, bro. I'm from Sudan, bro. Don't be like, I'm from Egypt, bro.
Tell me about the Sudanese. Tell me about the Sudanese.
Bro, y'all here, bro. Y'all trying to like divide the black people, bro. I don't like that shit, though, bro.
First of all, we ain't dividing. Listen, first of all, we ain't dividing black people. We bringing black people together.
That's right.
Not only are we bringing black people together, we bringing our black brothers with our Hispanic brothers.
That's
We're bringing
right.
our Hispanics together with our Native Indian brothers.
Right.
You just not a part of our people.
That's right.
Give me songs too. Give me songs too.
I'm African, bro. I don't like it.
I know. know you're African. I'm not African.
Look at Psalms,
I'm African. I thought you African.
I know you're African. I'm not. I'm sorry. Go ahead. He's mad at me because I bring out his history.
I think you my brother, but the police
You mad at me? When?
You talk about
when?
Bro, the police fuck with me in America.
When?
They're gonna stop me all the time.
Hey,
you don't even know.
Let me ask you this. Tell me the last time a Sudanese got shot in the back with no gun.
Bring it out.
You know, hey, you hear that about the
In America. In America. Show me the Sudanese getting gunned out of the street with no gun, hands up, don't shoot. Bring it up. Where the hell was the Sudanese when we was on plantations? Bring it up. Where the hell was the Sudanese when they was going to come and get us off the plantations? They was nowhere. You know why? Because you sold us to the so-called white.
That's what white people told you though.
Get that.
The white people in America told you that shit. That's why you trying to
This is Rock.
That's why you trying to hit me,
in
bro.
verse
I like
11.
that shit, bro.
The discourse
Come on, man. Don't do that, bro.
Come on, bring it out, man.
No, don't do that.
Listen,
white
go back to
people told
Deuteronomy
that shit,
28:68.
bro. White people told you that shit, not us, bro. Now you believe that shit now, bro.
You say I believe what?
White people told you, we sold you though.
Wait. No. White people also told me that me and you are the same.
What the?
We not the same. Okay, Exodus 11:7. Bring it out.
Exodus chapter 11, verse 7.
Go ahead.
Against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue.
Not a dog should move their tongue against the children of Israel. But what?
Against man or beast.
Go ahead.
That ye may know.
That we may know. That we may know what?
That the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel.
Read it again. He didn't hear.
That they may know that the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel.
Read it again. He didn't hear it.
That ye may know
that the Lord put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. It's a difference between me and you, bro. It's a difference between me and you, bro.
It doesn't matter.
It's a difference between me and you, bro.
I just come from Africa, bro.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Yeah, bro.
So all Africa is the same people.
We are Africa is a continent. It's not a country, bro.
Thank you.
We have a tribe, clan, and all that.
Thank you. And listen, and we not from the same tribe or clan.
That's right.
Well, isn't that interesting? Did you know that they differentiate between Black Americans and Africans? Did you know that when they're talking about the Israelites, they're talking about Native Americans, Latinos, and Black Americans? So it really doesn't make sense to call them the Black Hebrew Israelites. Like, the whole thing is based on the slave trade. And that's really just redefining their identity. Once you peel back that layer of the renewed identity, it's really just a strict adherence to the Bible. But anybody who has seen these guys proselytizing on street corners or wherever, you know that they don't actually spare Black Americans who don't believe in the ideology. They don't spare Africans. They talk shit about all of us. So it's not really a race thing, and it doesn't make sense to put them in this grouping as if they're like Afrocentric, like super pro-Black and all this type of stuff, because it's not really their thing. What their thing is dissecting the motherfucking Bible.
And what we're gonna do, we're gonna do a score tonight. We're gonna do a scorecard, but we're gonna use our hands for who's the Jews and who's not. But it's not gonna be the regular kind. I'm gonna take a different route. First, pull up so-called Jews. Pull up Jews, Jewish people. Pull up the picture. I want images. Okay, right. Just pick anyone with them coats. Y'all see the black coats? Watch this. I'm going to tell you why they wear the black coats. Jeremiah 14:2. This is why they do that.
Jeremiah 14 and verse 2. Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is going up.
So this is why because people often ask, why do they all wear black? Because of Jeremiah 14:2. It says, Judah mourneth, the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground. They took that so literal, they said, you know what? We have to dress in black. That's why they do that thing. But it's not talking about these people. It's talking about our people. Now type in black man. Anyone, I don't care. I hope no porn pops up. Okay, the guy in the middle. The guy in the middle. Now read the scripture again.
Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languish.
No, nobody saw lusting, by the way. Go ahead.
They are black. They are black unto the ground.
They are black like the earth.
Okay. So you're here now and you're looking at this and you're thinking, all right, so maybe they didn't get the idea that they are the Jews from white supremacists, but what is going on with this idea that the Jews aren't the real Jews? Obviously, that must come from white supremacists, right? Well, let's look into why they are claiming this and why people think this claim is anti-Semitic.
Some necessary background info. The two largest communities or denominations within Judaism are Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Today's Sephardim, or Sephardic Jews, are the descendants of the Jews who arrived on the Iberian Peninsula after the Babylonian and Roman exiles, before fleeing to southern Europe, the Balkans, and North Africa after the Alhambra decree, a record that is not contested. Ashkenazim, or Ashkenazi Jews, are those whose ancestors arrived in the Danube Valley and Rhineland areas after the Roman exile, with some accounts dating as far back as 321 CE, but there are some who call these historical events into question. A hypothesis dating back to the late 1800s states that Ashkenazi Jews are all descendants of the Khazars. In the 600s CE, in southeast Russia, a multi-ethnic conglomerate of Turkic people founded a powerful state made up of people from many different ethnicities. This was the kingdom of Khazaria. The theory goes that in the 8th century, the Khazar ruling class converted en masse to Judaism on the instruction of their ruler. According to this line of reasoning, these Jews didn't migrate from Jerusalem and Babylonia into France and Germany, but rather migrated from modern Russia and Ukraine. So, who's pushing this theory? Well, certain academics, for one. Their hypothesis got a big bump in 1976 when a writer and amateur anthropologist named Arthur Koestler published the now-debunked book, The 13th Tribe. Koestler thought that by proving Ashkenazi Jews were actually more European than Semitic, it would upend the foundations of European anti-Semitism. Ironically, Koestler's claims only served to feed anti-Semitism by accidentally resurrecting a theory that would only go on to serve the interests of bigots and the uninformed. After its publication, supporters expounded upon his claims even further, while detractors called it anti-Semitic. But why would the hypothesis be anti-Semitic instead of just another scholarly theory? It makes more sense when you look at some of the recent supporters of the theory, especially those outside of academia. These include online commenters, who use it to delegitimize the Jewish people by classifying them as a fake nation.
Now, isn't that interesting? So, this actually didn't start with white supremacists. This is something that started with someone who was trying to fight white supremacists by making the Jews seem more European, which would be completely against the ideology of white supremacists. And the claims for why this is anti-Semitic has nothing to do with white supremacy. It's all about people using this shit to delegitimize Israel. A lot of this shit has been debunked. And to be completely real, I really don't give a fuck about any of this religious shit. My thing is, like, shouldn't we actually know what their beliefs are and where their beliefs are coming from? Like, isn't that something that we need to, like, if we're going to critique these people, we actually need to know what the fuck they're talking about? You got absolutely none of this from Lexual's video. There is no context. And now that we got that out the way, let's talk about this decision to go on Vaush's show to talk about anti-Semitism in the black community. Vaush is one of these edgy leftists. He was actually kicked off of this platform called Twitch for making threats against Israel. If someone even shows a clip of Vaush, it doesn't even have to be related to that threat. They are at risk of being kicked off of that platform. So she decided to do an interview with Vaush to expose the anti-Semitism within the black community and to shame the rest of the black community for not being good leftists like Vaush.
Two groups of Africans that have been embraced as legitimate members of Israel or just accepted as having legitimate claims are the Falasa Jews of Ethiopia and the Lemba of Zimbabwe. The mere existence of these communities really strengthens the argument of modern-day Black Hebrew Israelites concerning the exodus of Hebrews from Israel into Africa. There is no doubt that the Black Hebrew Israelite community can anchor their historical perspective with this reality. Some of the truths within the Black Hebrew Israelite camp can be very compelling, giving the biblical and tangible evidence. The only problem from the outside observer seems to be the conflation of this history. The truth is, there is a history of Jews in Africa. According to most accounts, the earliest Jewish settlements were in North Africa, and it only makes sense for Judaism in Africa to begin in the north as a point of entry from the Levant region where it originated. Jews and Amazigh, or what we call today Berbers, ultimately interacted with each other, and some Berbers in North Africa actually converted to Judaism. But the most unlikely place people are to expect the presence of Judaism tends to be West Africa, because it's so far away from the origin of Judaism. Admittedly, the most direct evidence for Jews in West Africa comes from the West African writers themselves in the Tariq al-Fatash. The Tariq al-Fatash is a West African chronicle written in Arabic in the second half of the 17th century, and it provides an account of the Songhai and Mali empires. The Tariq al-Fatash describes a community called the Bani Israel that, in 1402, existed in Tendurma, Mali, possessed 333 wells, and had 7 leaders. It even goes on to list the names of these leaders, and even states that they had an army of around 1,500 men. There are many more accounts of Jews in Western Africa, but let's discuss the strongest claim from the Hebrew Israelites that support their narrative. Like mentioned before, the Hebrew Israelites claim that Hebrew communities lived in Africa, and historically that's true. But their strongest claim comes from Dr. Rudolf Windsor in his book From Babylon to Timbuktu. There, he proclaims a Hebrew Israelite state in West Africa called Kamnuria or Kanuria. The Moorish writer Leo Africanist informs us of the past existence of a medieval Hebrew state called Kamnuria or Kanuria. In fact, Kamnuria did indeed exist, and to Dr. Windsor's credit, there is very strong evidence that there were Jews living there. In Mauritania, according to oral tradition of Western Africa and Arab sources, the first inhabitants of Mauritania were the Bafour people, who apparently claimed Jewish origin. The Bafour were a pre-Berber people in the region who reportedly were Black Africans with some Semite ancestry. Al-Idrisi, the Muslim scholar and historian, writes, and I quote, "The inhabitants of Kamnuria, following the saying of merchants, claim to be Jews."
When you don't know a lot about these groups, it's easy to dismiss them based on what they got wrong. But what about the shit they got right? I think that's the problem that I'm having with a lot of shit, and why I even decided to dig into this and talk about this subject. I'm not interested in being some great defender of the Hebrew Israelites and trying to hold up their way as the right way. That's not even in my motivations. My issue is that there are a lot of black scholars that simply don't fit into the mainstream. But that doesn't mean that their scholarship is wrong. A lot of black academics are dismissed, downplayed, and ignored, while their white counterparts can be as eccentric as they fucking want to be and then be taken seriously. So even when black people are correct about some shit, they treat us like we're crazy. And then when a white person comes around and confirms the things that we've already been saying, they act like we never said the shit to begin with. And a key example of that are the Ethiopian Jews. For me, I'm not even into all this religious shit. I just think motherfuckers have the right to believe whatever the fuck they want. A lot of these leftists aren't into this religious shit either. They think it's all make-believe, which makes me then wonder why the fuck they are valuing one religion or one set of religious ideas over another.
Brings me to the next similar talking point, homophobia, who decry abortion as the genocide. This, of course, brings me to anti-feminism.
The problem with this is that you have lost all specificity. This is too broad. You can literally break down the Abrahamic religions and fit them into some of these categories, which means someone could turn around and then say someone like Martin Luther King was a Hotep. But if we were to take someone like John Henry Clarke, for instance, he was a Pan-African, and there is no doubt in my mind that these people would label him a Hotep because he was the very definition of Afrocentric. Like his whole philosophy centered Africa. But let's listen to what he has to say about these Abrahamic religions.
When you tell the truth about Africa, you're going to take the cover of a whole lot of people and a whole lot of fakery palmed off on us as religion. That include Hebrewism, Islam, and Christianity. Everything was brought into Africa from the outside, did Africa more harm than good. All organized religions were male chauvinist murder cults. And yet you had spirituality in Africa before that did not murder people, did not justify taking people's country based on the fact that my God said it's all right. And all the organized religions of the world have used it to justify that murder of other people. I think had man gotten common sense instead of religion, the world would have been much better off.
In the way that Lexual is describing it, I don't know how you can claim there's common ground between these different types of ideologies. But that's the whole problem with the way these people are presenting this concept. Like, this shit was never meant to be taken this seriously. This is insanity. This is all based on a joke. It was just a slang word to make fun of phony pro-black people. There is no core ideology of a fucking Hotep. That's just silliness. And what I'm seeing is that these leftists are just giving these white people an excuse to avoid uncomfortable black thoughts. And I'm not talking about in the realm of whatever they're discussing in these videos. I'm talking about fucking black people who are demanding answers for like racial injustice. Like, you're giving these people an excuse to avoid any of this because now they can just label us a Hotep. They don't even know what the fuck a Hotep is, but it creates all these negative images in their minds because you just threw a concoction of negativity together and told them this is what the fuck it is.
The last similarity I'm noting is a denial of rape culture.
But the whole society is geared to make a fool out of women. Right. Make you think your backside and your breasts and your hips and your hair is more important than your mind.
If you were to poll the young women in this audience, you might find over 50% of them have been abused by their fathers, have been abused by their uncles, have been abused by their brothers. There's very few of these young girls have grown up without being abused. When you abuse a girl, it's worthy of death.
That's right. Teach a lesson, baby.
Because what you don't know, what you don't know about the value of the female, the Native Americans can teach more about the value of the female than any religion that I've seen. Islam is my faith, but I don't like the practice in the way it treats women. Come on. It's so different from what the prophet wanted. The way Christians treat their women is so different than what Jesus wanted. The way the Jews treat their women is so much different than what Moses wanted. Till women all over the world are crying out. Because they're abused and misused and disrespected. Because we men don't know the value of a good woman.
That was Louis Farrakhan at a gang summit in St. Paul, Minnesota back in 1993. He is clearly denouncing rape, sexual abuse, and the mistreatment of women. Lexual called him out directly in her Hotep video. So Farrakhan is a quote-unquote Hotep who has been denouncing rape culture longer than this woman has been alive.
Here's one that people are really debating. Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, this is always a tough one for anyone who's a radical Democrat. It was probably more than he would have loved to have seen not only the end of the slave trade, but the end of slavery, but just couldn't bring himself to give up his own slaves. Okay, I mean, he held firmly to it, and at the very same time, by most historical and now genealogical accounts, he actually ends up in this long-time affair with Sally Hemings. Okay, and then to add to the curiosity of the whole thing is that Sally Hemings is the half-sister of his late wife, because it was his late wife's father who was also the father of Sally Hemings. And with Sally Hemings, there are children. And you could well have imagined that during his lifetime, he could see his way to the fact that
if he could love a black woman,
then surely equality would call upon him to bring an end to slavery on his own estate.
Yeah, my understanding is that that his that his relationship with that after his wife died, she sort of replaced his wife.
Right.
This was not Rush Limbaugh. This was not Sean Hannity. These are two leftists, two socialists. And they're talking about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Did you hear the word rape? Did you hear sexual abuse come up? They have completely sanitized this fucking story. How the fuck does a slave give consent? And when this shit started, Sally Hemings was a motherfucking child. This is normalizing rape. My question is, when are we going to start having honest conversations about this goddamn slave rape? Because that shit is literally in our fucking DNA.
The video we saw was it was the one that you did on, okay, I don't know if I could say this, on Hoteps, 5 commonalities between
Hotep tree.
Yeah. As I understand it, the Hotep is kind of like a sort of a mocking term because it's making fun of the tendency of black Israelites to transpose black identity on these historical figures, namely like Egypt, because you would have like the the idea that like the pharaohs were all black, which I think is sometimes true. And the term just kind of stuck.
Yeah. It originally started as a peace greeting in Afrocentric circles, and it has come to be like a colloquial term in the Black community for not just the Hebrew Israelites, but the people who, espouse all of those ideas that I talked about. So it's kind of like it's a slang way of calling somebody out, but it didn't start that way. So I don't have a problem with you saying Hotep, but I'm sure there are people who would. So it's up.
All right, do you see what I'm saying now? Do you see how this is a fucking problem? this guy watched her video as a source of information on some type of ideology that's going on in the black community, and that was his takeaway. He's completely confused. He is trying to make every Hotep a black Hebrew Israelite, and then he's trying to ascribe an ideology to the Hebrew Israelites that is kind of a contradiction of what they actually believe. And she was there live with him, and she didn't do much to clear that up. Like it was so vague. And I know if you were to ask this man now what a Hotep was, he wouldn't really know what to fucking say, or he would say some jumbled up mess like he just said in this video clip. This is a fucking problem.
A frustration that I've had is, okay, so I don't think there's like a black left and a white left for the most part. I think
there is.
Okay. To what extent?
Black people on the left can't even decide whether we're anti-capitalism or pro-capitalism. There are people who still feel like capitalism is the way to save our community. Like, there's a divide among black people on the left. So I know there's a divide among black and white people on the left. The same way up in Portland with the protests, one of the NAACP Portland affiliates was talking about how we need to focus on Black Lives Matter being the center of the protest. But there are a lot of black people like myself who, think we should be attacking capitalism because attacking capitalism because, cops enforce and protect class interests. So we can't even agree on that over here with black people. So I know there's a black and white divide, black people not trusting white people out on the streets who were protesting, saying that they're doing it for shits and giggles. So why do you think there isn't a divide between black and whites on the left?
Yeah, so let me clarify then. I would like to believe that for a lot of issues, particularly when I discuss them on my channel or when I engage with my community, I'd like to think that there are in many ways, a lot of ways I can talk about race and capitalism and crime and all these issues in a way that doesn't seem to elicit a strong divide in my audience along race. That generally speaking, at least in my community, I think we can agree on what you just said. I would like to think that your side on this issue is by far the most defensible one. The idea that, of course, Black Lives Matter is not inherently a strictly class movement, but it would be ridiculous, I think, to leave that out, and that to ignore it is to sort of passively roll over and allow for a dynamic of oppression to sort of go by unchecked. I feel like takes like those are, at least in my circles, relatively uncontroversial. And the issue that I have is that sometimes, in very specific ways, they are.
Yeah, she's one of those motherfuckers. Apparently, these protests need to be about class, even though the whole point is this disproportionate amount of police brutality against fucking black people. Now we need to talk about fucking class. And do you see how giddy this motherfucker was, knowing that he had one of these goofy motherfuckers on there with him, fucking co-signing this bullshit? We gotta wake up and see who the fuck all our enemies are. It's not just fucking Candace Owens. It's not just Diamond and Silk. It's not even when you go to the Democrat side. It's not just fucking Angela Rye and these motherfuckers. They also got them on the left. It's these lost motherfuckers that will take a situation that is clearly about some racist bullshit and try to make it about class. To fight the socialist fight. They're not fighting the black liberation fight. They're fighting the socialist fight. So they ain't with us. Like, it would be one thing if they would go to these motherfuckers and say, look, black people have been exclusively fucked over, and if we're going to say, like, we need to look at this from a class analysis, like, the only economic solution that makes sense is fucking reparations. If that was the way that they were attacking this shit, I would understand. But they know that would be a heated conversation. They know that conversation is not going to sit well with these white leftists. So they don't want to have that conversation. It's way easier to bash black people and to push socialism and then be able to move around in these white leftist circles unchallenged and unquestioned.
With before the Nick Cannon thing, I talked about how I wasn't a fan of black separatism, the idea that the best way to solve race issues is for all the black folk to just up and go and live in Africa or whatever. And that discourse got a lot of people mad at me, and the contradictions were really difficult to resolve because there's this underlying assumption that white people shouldn't speak over black people on race issues. Which was really frustrating because I felt like a lot of the black people were like these Nick Cannon types, where they're like really kind of giant pieces of shit who are using race as a vehicle for delivering prejudice. And I was wondering if you had a take on that particular issue.
Do you see how there's no specificity about what was actually said to him or what the actual arguments are? Like, he is really just using this as an excuse to avoid having, like, any serious conversation. And she's helping him.
You're wondering if I have a take on white people speaking over black issues, or do you feel like you can't speak without somebody accusing you of talking over?
More like, would you agree that there are some people of color who weaponize the presumption on the left that these issues shouldn't be spoken over by white folks? Yeah. What would you feel if you were browsing YouTube and you found a video that was like yours, except it was being done by a white lady? Do you think that would be an acceptable video, or do you think an element of the conversation or the message is being lost in the fact that it's not a black person criticizing black issues?
The message will get lost, but I find that a lot of the topics that I talk about are more well received when they come from somebody who's in the conventional mainstream, or they happen to be white, or they happen to be male. Because I talk about a lot of things that really should not be controversial, but when I say them, suddenly it's an issue. So if I got on YouTube and I saw a white woman speaking about Hoteps, yes, I would be kind of offended because I'm like, where are you coming from? You don't know these things. But at the same time, I'm like, well, she probably has 100,000, 200,000 views on that video, and it's probably getting more people talking about the topic, which is frustrating. So.
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%, yeah. It's like the weaponizing privilege thing, right? I mean, if you're going to have these issues, they're probably best spoken about by people who are most, or who are closest to them. But invariably, like, white men are always going to have their opinions signal boosted. So.
Yeah, and if you're going to facilitate those conversations, you should have someone who knows about it.
So she is simultaneously supporting this idea that black people are weaponizing their black skin to shut down white conversation. But at the same time, she's trying to tokenize herself to make it seem like the same information is more valid coming from her than the white woman. And the way she tries to flip it is like, oh, what does this white woman know about Hoteps? Shit, what do you know about Hoteps? You don't know what you're talking about. And what you're doing is you're going in front of these white people and you're filling their heads up with misinformation so that they're out here and they don't know what they're talking about.
Thank you. My thoughts have remained consistent on Hoteps. The Nick Cannon thing really blew my mind and really showed me how within the black community, we have our own work to do with throwing away certain conspiracy theories and ideologies, especially the anti-Semitic ones, because until we address a lot of these issues in our own community, then we won't be fully ready to integrate into a true leftist movement, I feel like, because we're still, a lot of these things are tinged with classism and elitism, and until we get rid of those, we're gonna keep talking in the same circle, saying the same things.
Yeah, the mask is completely off. Apparently, black people aren't worthy of being integrated into some leftist fucking movement, whatever the fuck that means. I think we need to go ahead and talk about the left for a second. I think we really need to break down this ideology and go back to a lot of its roots. For this, I am going to go to this book called Karl Marx Racist. This book was published in 1979. It was written by a former socialist who kind of wanted to spill the beans after he lost interest in the ideology. So what he did is he kind of went through all of Marx and Engels' letters to each other. And what he found is all these offensive beliefs that were held by Karl Marx and Engels. Chapter 7, page 71, Karl Marx on the Negro. Marx and Engels are customarily depicted as admirers of Abraham Lincoln, resolute foes of chattel slavery, and courageous champions of Negro rights, Negro equality, and Negro freedom. There is scarcely an iota of truth to this interpretation. Publicly and for political reasons, both Marx and Engels posed as friends of the Negro. In private, they were anti-black racists of the most odious sort. They had contempt for the entire Negro race, a contempt they expressed by comparing Negroes to animals, by identifying black people with idiots, and by continuously using the appropriate term in their private correspondence. Since they wrote to each other in German, this meant inserting the offensive English word instead of using the correct German word. Since neither revolutionary theorists had much interest in the Negro, and still less in the fate of Africa south of the Sahara, the quest for Marx and Engels' true views on the Negro has required a diligent and prolonged search. It has been rewarded, if that is the correct word, by some revealing expressions of gutter race hatred of the lowest sort. Marx wrote Engels on July 30th, 1862, that the Jewish LaSalle was fortunately leaving London towards the end of the week for his native Germany, adding, "It is now absolutely clear to me, as both the shape of his head and his hair texture shows, he descends from the Negroes who joined Moses' flight from Egypt, unless his mother or grandmother on the paternal side hybridized with an Arrogant." Now, the combination of Germanness and Jewishness with a primarily Negro substance necessarily creates a strange product. The pushiness of the fellow is also like. Wait, they never bring this up in the socialist meeting? If you're a little bit confused by what was just happening there, Marx has his own theory about black Egyptians and black Jews. Because apparently he thinks there was some race mixing going on in Egypt when the fucking Jews were making their exodus. So he looks at other Jews, and by their appearance, he makes a determination about their purity as a fucking Jew. And of course, this is on the basis of them having the possibility of inferior nigger blood from Africa.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's essentially just like color swap Nazis. I debate a lot of Nazis on my channel, and the beats are all the same. It's like you said, with the KKK and the white supremacy mirroring the talking points, or the Hoteps mirroring their talking points, maybe. The beats are all exactly the same. This like ultra-nationalism, a belief in racial separatism, a belief in a conspiracy to keep their racial group down. It hits like every single pointer. I know that.
My father's culture is gone. So you must remember that.
Really careful with this rhetoric, because that's what white nationalists say. And
I know.
But their
their culture is not being destroyed.
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't matter whether or not it is, because the rhetoric is what matters here. When we're talking about populist movements, what is and isn't true is significantly less important than what you can find political justification for. You're representing a fairly like tenable side of black nationalism, but I've talked with and I've seen a lot of fucking black folk who are complete fucking lunatics who LARP about like all the fucking black folk running over to the East Coast and taking boats over to Africa where they'll establish like a pan-African like ethno-state that they can use to fight against the whitey, you know? Like that's a thing that some people believe in, and I think that's a bad way of bringing about good, you know? But if what you want is as you've described here, then I agree with you totally. So when I just want to be like very careful with my language here, because if we start talking about cultures being like harmed or destroyed on their own being a bad thing, then we go back to the white nationalist rhetoric where they'll say like our culture is being destroyed when white people are as powerful as they have ever been, like geopolitically, you know? So I just want to be very careful with the distinction between harm against those two things. I understand what you're saying. I just like, again, I'm being a little careful here because you came in saying you were a black nationalist. So I was getting very ready for me to point out like how this and that, you know, the syllogisms between that and white nationalism. But
I see. I feel like maybe you should speak to more black nationalists or black activists.
I'm really sorry, but from the discourse that I've seen online, I don't know if your views are representative of the broader beliefs of many black like nationalists. I'm pretty sure a lot of them want to create a pan-African ethno-state in Africa. Like that's what I've like that's like what I've engaged in for the most part, you know?
Well, what I have engaged in for the most part, because if we're talking anecdotally and what we've personally seen, what I've engaged in the most part were just black activists trying to make a space to empower and focus on black issues.
Yeah, but the Democratic Party of the United States of America, even those milquetoast liberal weaklings, are also committed to this. Like even people like Pete Buttigieg were talking about the Frederick Douglass plan to put forward like reparations to like black folk and like ease the racial economic divide. Like what you're talking about, what you're trying to sell to me as black nationalism is so milquetoast that you could speak about it on the public debate stage in like a presidential election. So it's weird to me. Like if that is what you want to paint like black nationalism as, just like let's just make our economy, let's economically bolster ourselves. Let's make sure we're not being like overrun with because
the black leftists and the black academics and the general black population, not the crazies online, the black leftists, black academics, the general black population wants this. I think you're conflating, like, I'm not sure what you would call this, conflating that with black nationalism. I encourage you to read things like the Cambridge Guide to African American History and We Are Not What We Seem, Black Nationalists and the Class Struggle in the American, written by Bush and Roderick. I forget their names. I will link this to you.
I'm reading on it right now. The early history of black nationalism was characterized by people discussing the idea of blacks leaving America and forming an ethno-state. They didn't call it an ethno-state back then because most societies were more or less ethno.
I think that people had said that because they believed that white supremacy could never be removed. So the only way to protect themselves is to disengage from white supremacy. That means move or leave. I think that white supremacy can be removed, but if it couldn't ever, under any circumstance, be removed, the last resort would be to disengage for our own safety.
Okay, well, thankfully, I don't think racism is baked into the white genome, so I'm pretty sure we're eventually going to be able to get there.
Yes, and also one more contention that I had with you, in terms that, about black spaces being unnecessary and Ebonics being used to exclude white people from the conversation or something similar to that.
Okay, as for the AAVE thing, I only said that with regard to literal, like, black Nazbols. I only said that they would very deliberately enunciate the AAVE elements of their speech in text because doing so, was like a performative gesture, like a way of distinguishing themselves from the broader, like linguistic trends, which I think is pretty fucking cringe, in my personal opinion. But yeah,
But
it's
how
not. I'm
would-
not
how
saying
would
this
you
about
know?
all AAVE, huh?
I know, but how would you know though?
What? Because I have no respect for ethno-nationalists or for Nazbols, so I'll
But
say
I'm
whatever the fuck I
I'm
want
saying-
about them, huh?
But I'm saying, how would you know that they're deliberately invoking it and not just not speaking their dialect?
Because it's a pattern that I've seen a lot. Sometimes I've seen it like directly, like people, like the black person will talk like in one way when in their speech, but then they'll type in a very specific different way. It makes sense. Like it's the exact same shit that Nazis do. If you ever go on like a 4chan or something, or like Poll, and you see like the Nazi like LARP threads, they'll start talking like they're all fucking like medieval crusaders, you know? They'll talk about degeneracy and like the greater glory of the nation and all that crap.
Wait.
It's
Wait. It's called code switching. That's not comparable with that's dog whistling with Nazis. What we do is code switching.
Well, it kind of is dog whistling when you're doing the code switching as part of like an anti-white black nationalist message. At least it's a component to it.
But I'm trying to understand. But how would you know that they're intentionally invoking Ebonics to do this?
I can't deductively know what a person is doing or why they're doing it. I can only look at patterns of behavior from people
and try to like make sense of them with things that like seem to make sense to me.
And in some ways, I see it's like a coping mechanism when some Hoteps like to say we were kings and queens in Africa and all of these things, which is true. But like there were also slaves and there were, you know, poor people and fishermen. And, you know, we encompass a full scale of people. And to just put so much emphasis on the kings and queens part is that supremacy that we were talking about. And it's just a regurgitation of white supremacy at the end of the day.
Yeah, did you know that through the lens of a class analysis, black people saying that we were kings and queens in Africa is essentially the same as being Nazis and is enforcing some fascist supremacy. So at one point in time, before the internet, it was a very common belief amongst white Americans that the only things in Africa were jungles and savages, and that the white man went over there and civilized the black people. And the narratives that were told about black people were either the savage narrative or the slave narrative. That is the backdrop of this "we was kings" conversation. It was not only mocking us for the way we talked, but it was also mocking the very idea that there were kingdoms in Africa. That was the original conversation. Now that we have the internet and this stuff can easily be debunked, it seems like the "we was kings" joke has mutated. And now it's supposed to be about the fact that black people believe that there were civilizations in Africa where it was just kings and queens in the society and nothing else. Everyone was a king or a queen. It's completely fucking ridiculous. And the fact that this woman is playing into this, but from a socialist point of view, it lets me know that she's a fucking problem, but I'm not even sure if she knows it.
Damage their reputation in white America forever.
But she kept on talking. She kept on talking. She didn't know exactly who I was. She didn't know she was ruining my life.
Captain, I'm picking up some strange signals. Something about intergalactic oppressors, sir.
Captain, intruders are approaching the bridge, sir. Who are you?
I am the Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Spock, who is he? A former Calypso singer, Captain. who later became leader of a 20th century African-American religious sect known as the Nation of Islam.
You like to buy some incense?
Bean pie, my brother?
No, thank you.
What do you want?
I've come to warn your crew.
Warn your crew
of their enslavement.
Enslavement?
Aboard this vessel.
That's poppycock. These people are perfectly free to do anything they like.
It is that same lie that kept Elvis the king, that made that poor child LaToya Jackson think she could sing. It is that same lie that's got white boys rapping and the fat boys acting.
Hey, mister, you can't come in here and talk to me like that. Uhura, get me Starfleet Command.
Yes, Captain.
Oh, my Nubian princess. How long have you placed his cause? I watch the show every week, and all I see is the back of your nappy wig.
Uhura, Starfleet, now!
Well, wait a second. He's right. I've been sitting here for 15 years with this damn thing in my ear and ain't got one raise yet. Is that all I'm good for? To be your little secretary? Or your occasional chocolate fantasy? You get up off your flat butt and get Starfleet your damn self, because I ain't budging. Preach on, brother.
Yes, sister.
Mr. Zulu, call Scotty. Tell him to get this man out of here.
Wait a minute, Mr. Sulu. Before you touch that dial, answer me this question. Who does the laundry around here? I do.
Mr. Zulu.
Well, you call me Buddha head and pie face in front of everybody.
Well,
I've been in space all this time, and I haven't had one woman yet. You even take the ugly ones, Captain. My loins are about to explode. I want to do the nasty. That's right, rise up,
Mr. Spock, my friend, we've got to do something. Why do you say we, Caucasoid? It's obvious, Captain, that Minister Farrakhan is right. Spock, are you out of your Falcon mind? Well, logically speaking, Captain, I am the strongest and most intelligent person aboard this vessel, yet I'm only second in command.
Mm-hmm.
I should be captain, and I'm also a better director than you.
Can't you see it's discrimination?
You get off my ship, buddy.
Put your puny weapon down, Captain. You cannot harm me. My people have survived 400 years of slavery. 300 years of apartheid. And 25 years of the Jeffersons and syndication. Very good! Go to your room. Oh, I love it when I do that to them.